So memory is one of the most studied fields, studied aspects of psychology and neuroscience. So many scientists and researchers have contributed various terms to describe the various subcategories of memory. And one of those kind of luminaries in the field is a guy named Daniel Schachter, who is a professor of psychology at Harvard University. And his research is sort of broadly concerned with understanding the nature and function of human memory, using all these cognitive approaches, some neuropsychological approaches, and also neuroimaging, like fMRI, for example. And he's very interested, particularly in sort of the constructive nature of memory. Why memory is not always accurate. He has this very famous list of the 7 sins of memory, and how memory distortions can actually tell you something about how memory actually works. So his terms, his contribution to terminology, or among his contributions to the terminology, is to talk about the role of conscious recollection, sort of direct experiential consciousness about your past experiences. So explicit memory he talks about as conscious recollection from sort of direct efforts to access some specific learning event or experience or known fact. So it's most akin to declarative memory, right? It's memory for facts and events. But it emphasizes that sort of experiential conscious aspect of it. Like when I ask you to think about what you had for breakfast, you can sort of consciously reconstruct the breakfast that you had, and the food that you were eating and the people that were there. It's explicit memory, which is most akin again to declarative memory. And then he has what's called implicit memory, which is sort of unconscious changes in behavior that are influenced by previous experience. So this is most akin then to procedural memory, where it just happens, it just goes. You've acquired a skill or a habit, and it doesn't require sort of the conscious engagement or involvement the way that explicit memory does. So the role of consciousness is really emphasized in the terminology that was proposed by Daniel Schachter. Explicit memory is conscious recollection from direct efforts to access specific learning events or known facts, right? Most akin to declarative memory. And implicit memory is unconscious changes in behavior that are influenced by some previous experience, procedural memory. Now, it's really interesting to think about these two forms of memory, declarative or explicit memory, which we're going to see are going to be rather dependent upon cortical networks, particularly in the medial temporal lobe involving the hippocampus, and implicit or procedural memories, which are much more dependent on, once you have acquired them, on subcortical systems like the basal ganglia or cerebellar networks. But there's some real differences between these two forms. Like declarative or explicit memory is usually rather easy to acquire, but then also easy to forget. But think about your procedural memories. Think about the habits that you engage in. Think about the skills that you have developed. Like if you play an instrument, you didn't acquire that quickly, right? And if you ride a bicycle, you didn't acquire that immediately either. You had to practice and practice. So implicit and procedural memories require practice and going over and over and over again. However, they then become rather persistent, and they're going to stick around for a long time. Even if you haven't ridden a bicycle for a long time, if you get back on it, you're likely to be able to start up again and keep riding. While explicit memories, again, they're quick to acquire but also quick to lose. So we're going to give you some tips soon about how you might improve aspects of your explicit memory using various mnemonic tricks and tips. The other thing that's important to understand is that all of these memory systems, again, explicit memory or declarative memory, implicit memory or procedural memory, and also the salience, the emotional salience of various aspects of what you're learning and what you're recalling, all play a role, in your kind of experience of memory. If you're talking about specific memories that you have, for example, And so oftentimes when you are, learning new procedural skills, you're very much engaging medial temporal lobe, hippocampal networks that are involved in explicit memory too. As you really work to learn, there's a lot of cortical activity and a cortical engagement. And then, as you develop that skill, as this skill becomes more implicit, more just, it can just run, well, then you actually use more of these subcortical networks to, respond to stimuli with, remembered, timed, sorts of responses that are, essential for engaging in that skill. You use the force at a certain point, right? So there's some really interesting, kinds of insights to be gained by, considering Schachter's inclusion of the sort of the conscious aspect of explicit or declarative memory versus the sort of more unconscious, implicit skill, demonstration that people, provide once they've acquired, through a lot of effort and practice, those particular habits.